The purpose of my channel here is to advance understanding of some of the complexities of life. And as a victim of child sex abuse, I uh, have experienced much. And these are called trauma responses by the community. So I'm going to talk a little bit about trauma responses. And this is so important to understand about trauma victims. Um, and the essence of what happens, or what happened to me, is that the first emotion I felt was anger. The second emotion is fear and anxiety. And these are powerful, powerful influences on a man's life. It certainly was in my case. So let's talk about that for a minute. I think the first thing that goes, and goes completely, is my ability to trust anybody. And while I can confidently say that I do trust some people, I don't ever trust anybody all the way. I can't. How could I respond any differently to an act, a heinous act of child abuse, uh, by, being trustful? You can't. It destroys that because trauma uh, stops emotional development. And while I can confidently say that I have a high emotional IQ, in terms of myself, emotional development, I have to realize, was halted at that moment. That's when the little professor arises and your ego takes over. And I certainly have an ego, although mine points in the downward direction instead of up. I always felt that there was something wrong with me and that I had to be doing something wrong in order to feel right. Something was wrong with me. I was the cause of this trauma. And that is a tag that stays with you for a long, long time. At least it did for me. So, this episode in my life colored the lens through which I view society and other people. And that may make me cynical, but I've got to tell you, I'd a whole lot rather be cynical than naive, because trauma has a way of making you extremely vulnerable to other people and the thoughts and ideas of other people. So, I've said this before, but the Bible says, love your neighbor as yourself. And I would argue that unless you love yourself, it is impossible for you to love your neighbors. And that's, for me, a truth, an absolute truth. Um, I try really hard, but I still have problems with myself. And if I have problems with myself, how am I possibly able to truly love others? I can't. And so that inability to love myself, the feeling that there was something wrong with me, the idea that I was somehow the one corrupted, is a common trauma response. And it took me years, it took me most of my life until age 52 to realize that I was not in charge of me, that life was in charge of me. And I needed to respond to life instead of my own feelings. And that's a hard thing to do, friends. I mean to tell you, that's a hard thing to do. So I need to talk a lot more about this and be more specific, but my life is one giant trauma response. At least that's the way I view it today. You know, thanks to recovery, I'm a whole lot better than I used to be. I am more willing to grant other people their flaws uh, because I have to be able to grant myself my own flaws. And as I said earlier in talking about the ego and the self, um, you can overcome this by stepping outside yourself and viewing interactions from a distance, because that's when you can really see it, or at least that worked for me. So, like I said, I'm a whole lot better than I used to be, and thank God for that. But my life, I have to admit, has been one gigantic, ginormous trauma response. And of course, I could always be wrong because, I just really am a commentary.